Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Andrew, for the nice, as always, introduction. I really feel back at home here. And before starting the presentation, I usually like to present my outcome. What do I want to do within the next 15 minutes? And not only I want to present you the information that is very useful from IMIA, but I am here to ask you for help. And I do that based on the fact that after working with translators and interpreters for over 20 years now, I know that the level of compassion in this field is very, very high. So a little bit of introduction about what is IMIA. The International Medical Interpreters Association is an association committed to the advancement of professional medical interpreters and a way to guarantee the access to language services for communities of languages of lesser diffusion. The organization was founded in 1986. We are actually celebrating this weekend in Boston the 25th anniversary. It is the oldest and largest medical interpreting organization in the world. We have over 2,000 members representing approximately 70 different languages. The main focus, of course, is to promote the professionalization of medical interpreters, and we have worked in all the different areas related to professionalization, which is training, testing. We launched a national certification in the US 2 years ago in 2009, certification for medical interpreters. And the organization has been expanding exponentially. In the past, it used to be called the Massachusetts Medical Interpreters Association. It was in 2007 that we became international. We are starting growing in terms of committees, divisions, representatives. Right now, we have 24 state representatives across the US, but even more impressive, we have international representatives in 11 different countries all around the world: Japan, China, the UK, Spain, Italy, South Africa, Brazil, a few other countries, and especially Canada, where I really feel very honored having Professor Andrew Clifford as the representative for Canada, for IMIA. In terms of the committees, we have a few committees that have existed for a while, but we are also in the process of creating new committees. One of them, the Terminology Committee, and I mentioned that because the chair of that committee is another great Canadian, Professor Nelida Chan. And to support what Andrew was mentioning at the beginning, that we as Canadians, we have, or I think it was Henry that mentioned that we do have an outreach out there, and we can certainly contribute at the international level as well. So which are the two problems is if we go into the actual disaster relief and what IMIA is doing about it? There is the current disaster and emergency response do not address the problem of language services, of interpreting and translation needs. And the second main problem is that they do not understand the importance of professional interpreting and professional translation services. They are not aware of the consequences of working with a non-professional or just a volunteer. So who actually needs the service of interpreters? As you all know, over the last few years, the immigration keeps growing. Globalization is simply going, the expansion, it goes to a point that you have immigrants in every single country in the world. And you will always have language minority populations that require that additional support. And one example of problematic in terms of disaster relief was the Brazilian population in Japan during the earthquake. They had no access to information in Portuguese, and they were struggling with the situation. So in what situations you may have the need for interpreting or translation services? We focus more on interpreting, but translation is also one of the areas, of course. A pandemic flu outbreak such as the H1N1 we had in Toronto, the H1N1, and we had the SARS as well. If you remember, some of you may have translated documentation, and as a provider at the time, I still remember that we had to break all the cycles, like all the business processes that we had for translation. It didn't matter if the logo was 2 millimeters to the right or to the left. What mattered was, do you have fever, and get that message right away to the healthcare centers, to the hospitals. So it is really important that translators and interpreters understand that in certain occasions that flexibility is definitely needed. Earthquake, hurricanes, floods, nuclear power, wars, and rebellion. So there are a lot of instances where the service of interpreters and translators may be needed. And why professionals? People ask. In the past, many organizations have used only volunteers to do that, and could be just a person that speaks the language. As we all know, that is not the case, especially in the medical field. Interpreting in medical situations requires the specialized training. The medical terminology, a volunteer will not know medical terminology. You have to have the specialized training. There is also difficult settings, a lot of stress related to medical circumstances. When you have the training as an interpreter, you have teamwork orientation, which you obviously don't know how to deal with if you are just a volunteer. And medical terminology are mentioned, and the ability to work in the fast-paced environment. So the interpreters have the tools to work in these particular situations. What can we do to prepare? And this is something that has not been done in the past, and IMIA has been asking the question, how can we also help? And how others are helping already. Some hospitals are already including the interpreters in their drills and realizing that interpreters are a key piece in those prevention programs. Translation of disaster material ahead of time. So there are certain areas that are prone to tropical storms or to hurricanes, to earthquake. If you are in one of those areas, you should have access to written material that will allow you to be prepared for in the case that a disaster comes your way. Medical interpreting training also should include in the curriculum some training related to natural disasters and how to handle those, because of course you will need special skills in order to do that. And how is the service provided during natural disasters? Ideally, the service should be provided over the phone or by video, and this is mainly because of safety. As you know, all the different standards, code of ethics, existent right now for interpreting have as a first and foremost requirement the safety of the interpreter. However, in reality, many of the interpretations happens face-to-face because of the logistics, there is no technical support and whatnot. And there are different types of support for these volunteers. Depending on the organization that is taking care of the situation, the interpreter may be a fully volunteer, no expenses paid, or could go to full expenses paid and even an stipend for their work. So it really changes from one situation to the other depending on the organization handling the event. Now, what is the role of the professional association? And that's where we come in, IMIA and many other organizations that are helping. We have a unique position because we have the expertise and the knowledge in the area, which the organizations that are doing a great job providing support and relief services, for instance, the Red Cross, Translators Without Borders, and many other nonprofits, but we do have that expertise. So the first point is do the client education, because then we can let them know what is the difference, basic knowledge between professional and non-professional interpreter. And we work with them in the recruiting process, because we do have a database that I will speak a little bit later on about the potential interpreters that can work in a specific project or in a specific environment. We can also offer the interpreters information about the potential events where they can actually help. So it's basically putting together the interpreter with the organization, nonprofit or governmental organization that is handling a case. And of course, working with the community organizations to educate them ahead of time. So when the disaster comes, they are already prepared. That is very important, especially because some of the language minority communities need a special outreach, as I said, translation of documentation that they may not be familiar with. And how did the IMIA get involved? I think the Haiti earthquake had a big impact in many organizations. And it was in January 2010 when many colleagues across the US were discussing how can we help. So IMIA became the organization that said we are going to get together, let's meet once a week, and we are going to organize and see which interpreters are willing to assist in any way, in person, over the telephone, translating material, and this is how IMIA started getting involved, and in certain projects such as the Comfort Hospital ship and with the Japan Red Cross. And this, this hospital experience, it was stationed at Port-au-Prince. It was in Haiti for 7 weeks, no cell phones, and the first team of language providers that were on working with the project, they were non-professional interpreters, and they started to realize that they had a lot of problem with that. They didn't have the linguistic capacity, they didn't have the terminology, they didn't even the logistic, like they're working in tight spaces, seeing blood, like they are not really used or trained to do that just because they spoke the 2 languages. The Red Cross actually approached IMIA and asked for help and says, you know, we need to really work with professionals, we need to serve these people. And several interpreters were sent, and they started working. What had happened after Haiti, and we said, is this just the one project, or do we want to keep working, supporting disaster relief wherever it happens? And we now, as I said, IMIA is expanding, not only within the US, but international. We can certainly help. And it was in March 2011 this year. You were all aware of the disaster in Japan. We have the IMIA Japan rep, Kazumi Takesako. She is not only the IMIA Japan rep, but she's also the General Secretary of the Japanese Association of Medical Interpreters. And she managed to organize a team of interpreters, and they actually got very strong, getting ready and prepared to provide interpreting services. However, as you will see here, the translation needs were the ones that came out in Japan. And regretfully, that happened because most of the problems were casualties. A lot of people died, and the interpreters were actually needed for survivors, basically, for the ones that needed to be relocated. But then the written translation was needed to provide information about, for example, the nuclear problems that were coming for the large population, such as the Portuguese population. And this is what I explained about the Japan disaster. Now the network in Japan became stronger because of the earthquake. They were willing and ready to go ahead, and the Interpreters Association reached out to translators to make sure that there was enough service into different languages. What is the IMIA doing right now? We provide information to the organizations that are providing the relief services to make sure that they are aware about what a professional interpreter is and also what a professional translation is. We have the database, and if you go to the IMIA website, you will see that there is a long application, and as an interpreter, you will fill out, a certain form specifying all your credentials, where did you get your training, if you had a language test, the amount of experience, where are you willing to go, if you're willing to go somewhere, or what kind of work are you willing to do. And this information is accessed only by organizations that has been screened, such as the Red Cross. And what can you do? As I said at the beginning, it's only 10 minutes, but the point is to get your interest, that even if you are just translators, because most people here I know that are translators, you still have a lot to do. And the way is to get involved. You can get involved through the IMIA, you can get involved through Translators Without Borders, and consider being on that list. Maybe you will not be called, thank God if nothing happens, but just being on the list as a volunteer, you will make the job easier for many of those organizations that at the time of a disaster, they are really, really struggling to get the people to communicate with those people. And of course, spread the word about the different organizations. In this case, I'm promoting IMIA. And to wrap up, I just want to share with you the story that I heard from our Japan rep, Kazumi. And she said that in the previous earthquake in Japan, I think it was 1995, there were approximately 7,000 people that died in that earthquake. And when she was in an area where a woman was taking, she was wounded and she was being taken care of with one of the organizations, and she was screaming, don't take me, my child is under the roof. But the people were not understanding her at all. And she says, at that moment, I decided I will fight for language access for people that cannot communicate. because the baby was left alone. They couldn't see the baby, that it was hidden, and these people were just doing whatever they could, the best they could, and they basically just grabbed her, and they didn't understand what she was saying. And Kasumi was saying, that's the moment that I contacted IMIA, and now she's a big promoter and a big supporter of disaster relief all over. So anything that you can do, if you can, join one of the associations, offer volunteer in any capacity that you have as translators, that could make a big difference. It could have made the difference for that woman that, basically lost the child due to miscommunication and lack of language access.